My name is Karl Apsite. Had the opportunity to present to you guys yesterday about core schemes. Here again to talk a little bit more about catalog-driven development. It's pretty neat, and we had a wonderful presentation by Johan, who briefly covered some interesting things you can do with a proxy, and then like the introduction of a model 3D snapper that steals a lot of its information from the catalog. So today we're going to identify a couple additional patterns that kind of really help you start off on the right foot when you're writing a catalog-driven extension, just setting yourself up for success, giving yourself the information you need so that when you do need it, it's ready, present, and hopefully done in an efficient and extensible way. You can say all the flowery language. We're really only going to talk about 4 things. Hopefully they're not too groundbreaking. And of course, this is an open conversation, so if you guys have questions or you're confused about why we're doing something the way we're doing it, by all means, don't be afraid to ask. This extension is a very minimalistic extension. It lives right next to Johan's extension, catalog-driven extension advanced instead of basic, and it uses the same catalog, so you can install both. In CET, it shows up as the green tab here. And without further ado, the first thing that I use and almost do on anything that I'm working with when I'm working with a catalog-driven extension is I create a method that will manage my nominal values from usually the furniture guidelines. You're reading through, oh, it comes in at these nominal widths. And so having that information kind of readily at hand, very important that I found. It helps me position connectors, and it helps me deal with stretching, and it helps me also return an immediate local bound. There are a lot of ways to get a local bound, as it turns out, but just generating a box that has dimensions right off the bat pretty fast and can't be argued is wrong. And I found that it's always fun to avoid a couple of performance hits if you can try. And honestly, it's really simple stuff. You guys have probably seen a lot of stuff like this before, where we have either getter and setter on a private variable or just some width field, right? This is, of course, nothing special. Would like to point out that we have a width domain on all of these snappers that I'm going to be working with. This is my analogy to the Model 3D snapper. We're extending it, creating a data snapper. And then this is just where you could plug in your default values. So it looks like I've resized my window, so let's see if I can, there we go. So if we look at, say, the DC middle section, you can see just, your snappers can just quickly register from the data catalog. You can read through and type it in yourself. Nothing fancy here at all, just a little bit of manual data entry, but then setting up this little bit of work lets you kind of cruise through and write extensions that use this information pretty effectively. Any questions about something as simple as this? Hopefully not, because we're going to move right along and talk about how I choose to work with data kind of past this point. So I just usually assume that you always have your domains available and readily accessible, and then we can do some really cool stuff. So a lot of times when you're interacting with these complex data symbols that interface with the data catalog, you're choosing to represent a large host of part numbers or objects, and within one symbol or one snapper. So stretching it might change the part number behind the scenes, or clicking a checkbox might change the part number behind the scenes. So with that comes the need to always keep the data that you're holding on your snapper up to date. So this is the model that I oftentimes use, where the user makes some sort of change, either in some sort of animation or a stretch. Then we need this ubiquitous call to a new function called reset data. That'll just quickly realign the snapper that you're currently dealing with and set its part number and get it back up to speed. You'll invalidate your graphics, and then bam, your new model will appear. The method is as follows. We can also look at it in the code. It's hopefully something you don't have to write down because the code is available. This is something that Paul had the opportunity of writing in the back there. Thank you, Paul. And it seems to solve the problem very well. So the idea is working with the data just happens in this condensed function. It's available at the lowest level in your hierarchy for all of your objects. When you need to change your fields and properties, make a call to reset data, and everything should be realigned. This is usually done because you've made a call to receive your part number. This is another method on top of your data catalog, base level extension. And then your part number will quickly run through all of your aggregate fields and widths and depths and assemble some sort of part number that represents your project and of course is addressable in the catalog. So then this method will also perform a little bit of effort going through your available options and then try and transfer them over to the new data that will show up in a little bit. And it seems to solve it pretty well. So this method is just available. You can use it if it makes sense to do so. And then I'm going to quickly jump ahead to cache the 3D. Yes?
Is there a guarantee that the change itself actually affects 2D? Is that mandatory built for it?
Yeah, you know, I did notice that invalidate hiding down there. I'm not necessarily certain. I believe in some versions of this that I've written, I've removed those calls. It really depends on how often you're going to reset your data and in what scenarios are you resetting data. In this extension that you're seeing now,
so
there's probably not a need for it.
Reset is a total start over or
it can be considered that.
you say you want to do that for every change, but what if the change does not affect all sides?
No, you're absolutely correct. It isn't necessary. In fact, I think it could be considered an error to leave build2D and invalidate on the bottom of this function. Yes, Johan?
I see here one thing that I would assume is incorrect, or not incorrect, but it's unnecessary, and that is part number that doesn't change. You probably don't need to do all this stuff.
You're not wrong. If your part number has not changed, then you may not have to redo all of this. Good now. I am going to move on to caching 3D, which happens quite frequently. While catalog graphics are cached to some extent at the polygonal mesh layer, adding your own cache key and using the cache syntax actually improves performance, and we can actually create a live demo of that to talk a little bit about it. Of course, caching your graphics isn't very useful unless you have a cache key to use. So generating a cache key from available data is something that you need to do, but it usually involves running through your set options and kind of assembling a cache key recursively. So here we have just some example of how one might try and do that. And then we can use that to launch straight into a demo. Of course, to demo it, I'm going to show what happens when you don't have any cache or when you don't have any occurring using just the snappers coming straight from the catalog. So we'll drop in a couple of these and then replicate them a couple 100 times or so. And we can just kind of get a feel for the performance that's going on here. I don't have any microtimes or p times currently running right now. But we can see that, of course, as things pop in, it'll take a little bit for all the bottom of the row. Oh, I didn't actually copy all of them, didn't I? Let's go ahead and undo that. There we go. There we go. Well, I mean, only a couple rockets, right? There we go. All right, so we're waiting. Something's going on, but yeah. And they'll slowly pop in, right? So maybe that sort of performance is agreeable, but I think we can do it a little better. And so if we go ahead and get rid of all of these and then rebuild our arsenal with slightly more efficient weapons here, then the same application can occur only a little faster, which is kind of cool. And this was just occurred by adding a cache syntax to existing data graphics. So hopping over to the code, it's not going to be anything special, hopefully what we expect. I'm already on the right tab, perfect. We can head down to our cached 3D and our data snapper. And you can see all we've done is just cache our existing graphics on the graphic. Yes, Johan?
So why is that? Because it seems to me like the 3D should be cached in the DSP data anyway, and I believe they have 3D cache, so why is that? Is it, did they build up the keys lower, or why is that?
I don't have write permission to data catalog. This is what we have to do currently on our snappers today to get the performance we're hoping to see. And so if this is something you'd like to do, or if this is something we should push down to core, we can have that conversation, but this is currently what we have to do at this moment in time. While this is going on, it's kind of fun to talk about. Sometimes the graphics you get back from your catalog do something weird, depending on what your manufacturer did and what you have to work with. Sometimes your graphics have a different origin than what you were expecting. Sometimes they're placed off origin for no reason. In very rare cases, your graphics are scaled improperly, or they're just at an odd rotation. So at this high-level hierarchy, I've added the ability to just quickly adjust the rotation, scale, and offset, something that has saved me a lot of time because, the thing that came in is offset the depth. So let's quickly move it, and then we're on our merry way. So the ability to adjust what you're getting back from the catalog and control it in some minimal fashion can save you a little bit of time. And then that's really just another simple thing that I found saves a lot of time while working with a catalog. Hopefully we're not breaking too many boundaries here. But I found this, again, to be incredibly useful. Hopefully I'm not too repetitive. Sorry. Alrighty. So the last one is, I think, a really fun one to talk about. Hopefully we can get into some meat here. This happens to me a lot. I'm not sure if this guy's, how many of you are actually currently working on a catalog-driven extension, but oftentimes you'll find similar-looking furniture where you want to represent all of this furniture with one symbol, a table symbol that can stretch in width and depth. Sounds great, but then, of course, your catalog is actually missing data. These conversations are always fun to have with the manufacturer. Hey, how come I can't get this table? I really want this table, right? You want it so that you can stretch all 9 widths and depths. And you get some manufacturing process that limits the ability to make the table at that specific depth. It doesn't work in the machine, or something goes wrong terribly down the line. So they don't offer it. But then you've got a problem. How do you make the snapper as one symbol? How do you make it stretch in both directions and solve this issue where one of them's missing? You can see how this might cause some problems in the ability to limit the user in some way, and that could cause a confusing mess. So the simplest thing that I've been able to do is just simply act like the symbol exists. In this case, we would create a fake table at those arrows, at least in terms of what our domains and stretching would allow, so the user could stretch to that dimension. But then afterwards, let the user know that something bad has occurred. Take that primitive that they've made and adjust its material to be bright red, maybe generate some invalidations or some tooltips that say like, hey, this thing currently isn't being offered. And that way the user can arrive at this illegal position, but then once they're notified of it, can find their own way out. Instead of trying to use the existing functions to either limit their ability to get into the illegal situation, or what oftentimes has to happen, like limit their options, it creates a situation where users might find their options disappear from them. Hey, how come I can't stretch it to 60 inches anymore? I used to be able to do that, but now I can't, and that's a very confusing thing to do. Well, now they'll always be able to stretch it to 60 inches, but when they do, they're told, hey, you can't do that. Like, you did something bad, you need to fix it now. But of course, what happens with data catalogs is you'll no longer have graphics. Your graphics for that option don't exist because there is no entry in the data for it. So you need some way to generate graphics for that scenario. So what I found to be pretty helpful is a function that lies, changes your data's part number, fetches the data for that part number, you get it back, and then you scale it to what you need to. In this case, you'll oftentimes find a table of a different dimension, 6 inches less, and then once you get it, you can scale yourself back to the 6 inches wider version. The widths and stuff like that will just be ever so slightly off, but that's not noticeable if you're working on a 60-inch table and your 1-inch margin got bumped up to 1.2 or something. But then at the end of the day, you'll have your graphics. There's a very tricky little bit of referential call to your get cache 3D going on in here in order to avoid your like consuming classes from overriding get cache 3D in a way you didn't expect. And then what ends up happening is you have a cached graphic. So, or not a cached graphic, but like an invalid graphic to be generated from the catalog. So in this extension, what I've done is I've added some stretching behavior to the middle section to stretch between those data options that we saw in the first time. So the data options are removed from the quick properties and have instead been added as an ability to be stretched. And then you can, of course, stretch to all 3. And then you can paint the middle section orange, I believe it was. But in my story, the orange middle section and the part that paints them can't fit the largest section. So we have a problem here. This is impossible to order. So what I've done is I've turned it red, and then we've created some invalid tooltips. Hey, this is currently not at a valid height, and you've got some available options, just not the one you've chosen. And this is great. The user has 2 ways out of it. They could stretch it back down if they were okay with that, or they could just find any other option and then try and change it, and all of a sudden we should be back to where we were. Looks like I've got some graphics caching trouble. Bummer. But we can stretch it back, and there we are. So that's an additional method that I found to be very useful at this low-level layer. This is basically a collection of useful utilities that might benefit you as you're writing a data catalog extension. The tooltip text that you just saw was being generated by the invalidations that were currently occurring. So this tooltip text will run and quickly iterate through all of the invalidations that snapper can generate, and then we'll just dump the text in the bottom with its invalid level. This is kind of useful if you want to run your invalidations this way. It really depends on how performant your invalidations can be. Some invalidations can be very heavy, in which case a system like this might not be great, especially when you hover over snappers in your drawing. If your invalidations are light across the extension, this can be something that's safe to do. And I found it to be pretty useful. Of course, only recommendation, only a demonstration of something that can be done. We can go over into more parts of this demo extension if we want to, but are there any questions out there before we continue? Because I think this is honestly most of what I had to talk about. It's a lot of simple stuff. Yes?
Where is this extension located?
This extension is located. Nope. Is it there? It's not there.
In conference?
There it is. There it is. So if you're interested in reading up a lot on this code, go ahead and write this down. This is the path that you will find in.
Then I think I don't have the access. I'm not getting any.
You're not getting access to custom developer conferences? Okay. It was intended for that to be public, so I suppose we can have a conversation with Gustav perhaps. Do you know if this was intended to be public?
It is public, but we have some problems with people not getting down the files. So if you go into Perforce and you get latest revision on this folder, you get it.
Second thing, it's so nicely implemented, why it's not going in abstract? I mean, we know that we cannot drive from data symbol. So when this class here is bringing all that power, so this could be something at some core level where we could just drive, and if my thought coming.
Go ahead, Paul.
If I'm wrong,
It's too hard to predict what you need from that. What you saw there was a very idyllic, cookie cutter, perfect world. No one lives in that world, right? We can't possibly predict what your needs are going to be. So the best we can do is present to you an idyllic example, which is pretty trim. There's not a lot of code there to make your own like base snappers, and then adapt it to your own needs. To put it down into abstract would be putting restraints on you that you aren't going to want later. So we'd rather let you do it your own way.
the only thing where I'm coming from is when we implement data symbol, use data symbol for our any data driven extension, a lot of loaded things we are not comfortably able to handle. But if something like this is there, a team can decide whether they want to use data symbol or use this sort of class where they have power in the future. Or because we are not even able to drive from data symbol and keep reservations for future. But if this type of class is there, we can simply drive from it and then we have reservations for future. Like we'll be able to have something.
The idea is to, if you want to inherit from panel frame, for example, now you just need to copy this little piece of code into your own panel frame system.
I'm coming from that for data driven things.
Okay, for pure data driven things. This is like the half thing. You take this code into your panel frame data with panel frame. That's the intention, I think, with this type of thing. What you're saying, you want to basically have your own fully data driven thing from scratch rather than utilizing abstract office then. Because abstract office gives you the work surfaces, the panel frames, the junctions, the overheads and so on.
Advanced data driven extension on the
Okay.
all the PGC.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
You are able to rescue some of these functions and implementations in order to make a both data symbol or like a data-driven extension that also extends from Office workspace. So that might be yet another reason to kind of demonstrate this functionality as a giant pile of functions that you can choose to use or learn from. We had some good comments earlier. Hey, this reset data function looks a little suspicious. Maybe it does too much. Maybe we need to pare it down a little bit. And that's the kind of thought process we're hoping to promote. Look at it, determine if it's right for you, and then choose to implement it in your base classes.
So another thing, can you go to your 3D? I think you have got something in the same search for save instance 3D. I was saw something.
Is this what you would like to see, Johan?
Yeah, do you have a safe instance 3D scanner?
Perhaps down here.
Yes.
You know, this does seem a little unnecessary.
I just want to see here what I'm doing. Okay, so we don't. You are assuming that we have a good thing there, otherwise you wouldn't crash there when we don't scale. I say instance 3D doesn't do anything except just return an instance 3D. So you're already assuming that you have a good thing, otherwise you can crash.
You're right.
So I don't know if you, so this, I should be safe out properly or somehow it should be done.
I mean, yeah, simply we could just toss one of these in there lazily. But yeah, that's ignoring the fact that, hey, we didn't consider that we might be getting a null this entire time. And so yeah, we should probably look at that a little bit. Hopefully this demo extension can be a little living than it is dead. But yes, during the time that I had to prepare, I probably didn't spend the best amount of time trying to write the most surefire code here. But hopefully it's good enough to get some value out of it. Are there any other questions out there? We had some good ones out there. Any other questions at all? Yes, Paul.
I should also point out there are plans to add examples of data-driven snappers to Fika. So eventually there will be like public available, and we can look at an implementation of data-driven extensions in Fika.
Yeah, absolutely. This was. Yeah, so Fika already has the chair currently driven from the data. It's a little remedial. I don't think it has as many kind of fun things in it like this does. So I think the hope is that we get something kind of halfway in between, like a kitted out data snapper that you might want to look at as a good example, that also has a lot more other options in it that Fika can also use to drive. So we're working on it, I think is a good way of saying it. I'm seeing a lot of eyes. Are there any other questions? I don't think I have much more to talk about today. Well, thank you guys so much for your time and attention. I would love to talk more about this stuff if you have any more personal questions, but other than that, thank you guys so much for coming, and I hope you guys have a great rest of the conference.